how to get out of them. Well, it's, so how many debates will we get out of it? Well, first of all, I would say that many incumbents, Chris Gibson and I don't subscribe to this policy, but many incumbents think that the best way to win votes is by not debating their opponent. And there's some value to that, right? If you don't talk to your opponent, you'll never have to answer any questions. This governor has taken it to an art form. So much so, as you know, he's in the midst of a primary. They were trying to have multiple debates. He negotiated with the television station all the specifics, and then said to his opponent, Cynthia Nixon, who deserves an opportunity to ask questions and to answer questions, said to her, "You take it or leave it. And oh, by the way, sit down. The debate is in a chair. You have to sit down." I mean, first of all, I can't imagine I wouldn't tell my wife that, let alone someone else. But that said, it's up to him, right? I'll debate him anywhere. And what we've said, we just announced this yesterday, I think New York deserves a debate commission like they do nationally. Actually have good government groups, members of the media, they can circulate in, create a set of rules, and say to the candidates, this is how we do it. And then let's go at it. I don't know that he'll agree to that, but we think that makes sense. And by the way, hold it to whomever is the governor, period. I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. Set the rules. You deserve an open conversation. You deserve to hear the candidates answer questions, and you deserve to be able to make a decision. But this guy doesn't want to do that. So I'll tell you that I will debate him in a box. I'll debate him with a box. I'll debate him in a chair. I'll debate him at the fair. You can tell my favorite author is Dr. Seuss. In all seriousness, I absolutely believe that the voters of New York deserve an opportunity. This is important. I mean, I think he should answer why he said he would support term limits, 2 4-year terms, yet he's running for his 12th year in office. I think that's an honest conversation to have. But we're going to ask and demand for as much as we can because we think you deserve it. Okay, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to call you ma'am. Yes.
Sheila.
My mom said don't ever do that.
I'm here as a family member of Nextova. We need that to change, and we need to see that your support for
Yeah. Listen, when I was a member of the state assembly, I always worked with Nextova, and I absolutely will have their back. I'll have all law enforcement. In fact, these men and women. See? I got a referee. He's going to tell you to stop. Listen, all of them sacrifice every day for us. And we've gotten to a point where it does seem to me that people disregard and dismiss those men and women who provide for our safety. They sacrifice. And by the way, and I don't want to go too far, but it's one of the things that upset me when I heard what the governor said last week about America was never that great. I mean, these are men and women who take an oath to an idea, to a set of principles, and those principles demand that they walk this fine line, whether it's in a jail or prison facility or out on the streets. Yes, and so in the jail, certainly. Yes, you're absolutely right. So you deserve to have the governor support that, respect that. The other is I'd offer to you that we've created a criminal justice system that has heightened the adversity and the combat in those facilities. I mean, we have, this is the irony of it all, I serve at the county level where the state of New York says you must reform your justice system, you must reform your jail, and I believe in that. I want in my county a facility that isn't so 1980s. Well, they should look in the mirror, because at the end of the day, we've created a criminal justice system that, by the way, isn't the healthiest for either the employee or the inmate. And that's why that should be addressed comprehensively. And yes, the resources we have ought to be there to protect those men and women who provide for our safety in those facilities.
And a crumbling prison system.
Yes, a crumbling prison system. You're absolutely right. Yes, sir.
Yeah. My name is Carl.
Carl.
Being a county executive and being in county government, you can understand the state's Medicaid reimbursement. And even though it's been explained to me that there's a cap, there really isn't. So, as a county executive and as a future governor, would you consider bringing those Medicaid payments back to the federal government instead of putting them on the taxpayers' back?
Right. I want the state of New York to be responsible for Medicaid costs, period. And that's the partnership that was established some years ago, right? It's part federal, part state. This state does something that most other states in the country don't do, and that is, as you know, shift much of some portion, I don't want to say much, excuse me, 17 to 25% of Medicaid costs get shifted down onto counties and local property taxes. There's 2 reasons I want to address this. This is one, how you begin the process of lowering property taxes. In my county, Medicaid cost represents about 30% of our tax levy. So if New York State, over the course of 4 years, let's say, takes back Medicaid costs with the expectation that you lower your tax levy, we begin by lowering county taxes by 20, 30, 40%. Number one, tax relief. That's one of the ways you get there. Number two, this state, because it shifts Medicaid costs to 56 separate units of government. There's 62 counties. Did I get that right? 57 units of government, 5 boroughs of New York. So New York City runs Medicaid for their city, right? And then the rest of the counties are responsible for Medicaid administration statewide. Well, if you were delivering a service, or, I don't know, driving a car, and you had 57 drivers, how effective do you think that would be? If all of us had our own steering wheel and we're all steering the car, do you think we'd get to where we're going? No. So what ends up happening is that there's waste, there's abuse, there's fraud, there's inefficiencies, because every county government throughout the state is managing their program. And in some places, they may have the Class A delivery, and in some other places, they may make you wait in line. I waited in line. To this day, I remember as a kid, my parents divorced when I was very young. My mom was single for a number of years. My parents, and I love my father. I love my father. We got to know each other a little bit better as I got older. But when we were young, my mom was raising her boys, right? And food stamps helped us put food on the table. I say it because my mom made it clear that this was our way of getting back on our feet. And I thought I was the luckiest kid at the James V. Forrestal Elementary School in Beacon, New York, because I didn't have to buy lunch. But my mom made clear that that was the help we needed to get ahead. But I, to this day, I absolutely remember my mom waiting online in an old social services building, and I can tell you it was not the highlight of her life. She felt demoralized and in many ways dismissed. And she stood in that line. And I remember a woman, and it doesn't matter who she was, on the other side of the counter, who probably had a bad day and probably was already stressed out, who looked at my mom and made her feel this big. Now imagine looking at your mother and seeing her so pained by it. Now that wasn't that woman's fault, and I now am responsible for the administration of social services, and I say to our folks, you've got to remember, people come through the door at the worst points of their life, they just need help, and you've got to be better at it. But I know the power that government has if it's not effective and efficient, and if it's not nurturing in the way that it needs to be. I want to be responsible for Medicaid statewide because I want to be responsible for the delivery of the service. Medicaid is an important tool for those who are living in poverty. It's an important tool for those living with developmental disabilities, and I'm not willing to blame somebody else. And for the last however many years, state office holders have blamed the local governments, have said it's their problem, you go deal with it. I don't want that. I want the responsibility. I want to go running to that line and saying to everybody who waits for that service that you have somebody who's going to demand efficiency. If you're stealing from the system and you're a provider, you're going to lose your license or go to jail. And at the end of the day, I want to make sure everybody, regardless of their level or their income or their vulnerabilities in life, has the system that supports them. And by doing that, we'll create savings. One steering wheel, one driver, more effective. And by doing that, every dollar we save, again, my caveat to local government leaders, every dollar we save goes back into property tax relief, period. That's what we should be doing. I'm going to go to the gentleman behind my referee, and then I'm going to go over to Chris because I like to try to mix it up.
My name's Ernie.
Ernie.
I'd like to hear your stand on the Second Amendment.
I support the Second Amendment. I have always supported the Second Amendment. I believe in all of the individual rights. I believe that we have to do more to restore those rights for law-abiding citizens in the state of New York. I don't think the governor cares for your Second Amendment, and quite frankly, these days, I don't think he really likes your First Amendment either. And let me tell you this, but that doesn't dismiss our responsibility to provide for public safety. And one of the things we haven't done, whether it's the SAFE Act or some other legislation, we aren't safer. We still have shootings in our communities. We still have those living in violence. We still have those who are dealing with great trauma who aren't getting the help they need. And we see them acting out in violent ways every day. We have to do more. So let me tell you what I do in my county, okay? Number one, we train law enforcement. Our police officers in Dutchess County get crisis intervention training and mental health first aid because they're the first line of defense to provide not only for our safety, but for the help those people need. In all the schools that want them, we provide a school resource officer, not only for security, that's important, but they become the first line of communication between a troubled kid and the help that they need. So with CIT and mental health first aid, these men and women get to see and identify those kids who are living with trauma. Let me also say, I don't believe that teachers should be armed. They need to teach. Teachers need to teach. But every building should have safety and security in it. Where are our most vulnerable? During most of the day, most of the year, most of the time, but in a school building. So having a school resource officer there should happen. I'll get you, I promise. New York State has the resources to do it. We have state police officers. We have other law enforcement entities that if we give them mental health first aid, crisis intervention training, they can be helpful. In Dutchess County, we teach our teachers mental health first aid. Then we can identify those kids who are living in traumatic scenarios, right? The other thing we do, I know this is getting long, and it was a very short question, so I already broke my rule, but the other thing we have is our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week mental health helpline. Every county in the state should have a localized helpline. Why? Because we know the people we need to interact with. You need to have a local person at the other end of the phone. You can call or text, get one of our mental health professionals to help. We have a mobile intervention team. Every county should have one. Several counties do. This one does. Where we go out to the scene. We'll go to a school that may want to teach about mental health issues. We'll go to where the addicts are to provide the assistance. We'll deal with those in your own home if one of your family members is dealing with some mental health or traumatic scenario. And then we opened our stabilization center, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You walk through that door, we provide you help. Or we'll bring you there to provide you help. Why? Because if we don't start supporting humanity, actually dealing with the root causes of violence and trauma, we are going to continue to see violence and trauma. So our goal in Dutchess has always been, and we're not perfect, but our goal has been able to provide those services. And I think more than anybody, this governor has a problem with just checking a box and moving on. In fact, his new campaign logo is check a box. You don't make communities safer by checking a box. This governor, dating back from his father to today, has helped to dismantle mental health services in the state of New York. We need to do more to acknowledge that there are those who will act out against themselves or others, and we ought to be providing the help they need, not checking a box with some legislation passed in the middle of the night. Okay? I promised, I said Chris next, so Chris, go ahead.
Sure, I understand how you intend to address that.
Yeah.
Connected to your last comment.
Connected to my last comment.
About Medicaid override.
Well, first I think having the state manage Medicaid instead of bifurcating the management process should at least streamline some delivery. But you are right, generally speaking. Albany takes federal highway dollars and siphons 30 cents off of the dollar. I mean, it just absorbs too much cost and money in the bureaucracy, and then that doesn't get to the ground, right? It's one of the reasons we spend much, much more per student than many other states in America, and we don't have the results to show it because it gets gobbled up in bureaucracy. So what we try to do, and you know this, and we're not perfect yet either, is streamline that at my level, right? The county level, we try to make it easier where we'll pay you up front instead of reimbursement. Instead of going through 3 layers of government, you only go through 1. I want to make it as efficient and effective in delivering the resources to service providers in the area, certainly developmental disabilities, but beyond that, so that the money gets onto the street and we're more effective. Here's the other thing. As it relates to the community that you and I are talking about, those living with developmental disabilities, we have to be better. We have to be better at getting the dollars and the resources to the service provider and the consumer, the individual who deserves the help. So that means we've got to cut it. We've got to cut through it all. And when I joke about the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing, how many agencies and departments and divisions of whatever do you have to deal with to get one service? I mean, I know it. So one of the things that I didn't say about my children that I want you to know is that, again, 3 wonderful children. We have a 4th on the way. My wife is really thrilled. She's thrilled about the baby, but she's not so much thrilled that I'm not home. I am blessed with a beautiful daughter who was born on the autism spectrum, lives with developmental disabilities. I live this. I live this every day. And what I would tell you is there are a few things we have to do. Number one, as a society, we've got to break through what I perceive, and many do, as sort of the last acceptable prejudice, that of low expectations. That we think certain people with different abilities can't achieve certain things, and we're wrong. And that means, I think, as a governor, you need somebody who's going to stand up and say, that is not right. And I know, and you and I have had this interaction once before, that's why I got offended when the governor made a joke about his brother having a disability. Because that's not the butt of a joke. It isn't. Every life deserves to have somebody who loves it, who will embrace it, who will help it to grow. And I've learned through my daughter the value of even the smallest success, and I know you know this, so I'm preaching to you. Even the smallest success is worth celebrating, and if we did that, if we slow down as a society, we'll break through a lot of the stigma, a lot of our thinking, and change the way we interact with those living with disabilities. The other is, government is really bad at making it easy for people with developmental disabilities. And we have to change that. And what that means, by the way, is that you and I, when we're struggling to get the Medicaid waiver, we need to try to get some service, when am I doing that? 9 to 5, Monday through Friday? No. Mom and dad are working. They're trying to make sure that the kids are getting back and forth to the job. Maybe if you're living with a family member who's got a disability, you're getting them off to the service provider. You're trying to get them the one job that maybe is available to them. When am I going to have the time to do what everyone else does, by waiting online one Thursday afternoon at the DMV? I need to be able to do it all the other times. So government needs to accommodate that by making it easier to navigate the system, consolidating the layers so that you don't have to go through this maze of bureaucracy to get help. And then this state has to stop dismantling the services and dismissing those services for those with disabilities and diminishing the capacity of service providers to provide the help. So we need more job opportunities. We need more money to get to the direct care workers. We need to ensure that there's residences and housing opportunities. And by the way, all of us have to ensure there's transportation options. Those are the kinds of things I want us to focus on. And I've said this and I mean it. I mean it. There will never have been a stronger advocate for those with developmental disabilities than me if I'm governor of the state of New York, because it's about time we lift up everyone, every member. So that's what I believe in. My referee, and then I'll make the rounds. Gentlemen, ma'am, sir. Gentlemen.
Okay, Stu.
Stu. Is that really your name?
Yeah, Stu was Stewart, but that's when I was bad. Short and sweet, what's your stance on legalizing marijuana to get more tax money into the state?
I do not believe in making big decisions based on tax revenue. If you're making the decision based on making money, you're probably not doing it right. I am not prepared to embrace legalization, although I do believe in decriminalization, and I do want us to expand. No one should be in jail, clogging up jails because of a marijuana issue. But what I want to do is expand medical access. We've done a horrible job in the state of New York in making sure those who have a medical condition where marijuana would benefit them. We've done a horrible job, and I think we need to make much easier access. We need providers to be able to provide, and we need to be able to use it for the medical benefits that a physician believes. There are a lot of other questions that have to go into answer. How does marijuana, secondhand smoke, affect juveniles and adolescents and toddlers and infants? Those are some of the things that we need to address, I think, and there are other states who are legalizing. I'd like to see how they start to answer those questions before we go rushing in. I said, sir, and then, did I say you in the back? Okay, sir, yes, I apologize.
Yeah, Mark, my name is Chip. I drove up here from Orange County because I want to support you for our next governor.
But?
Yeah. So there were two articles that I found in my video that I'd be concerned with. One was that you're distancing yourself from President Trump.
Yeah.
And the second was that you're involved on the issue of same-sex marriage. I wonder if you...
Okay, well, I would say I'm not distancing myself from anything. I'm running for governor of the state of New York, and you deserve a governor who calls balls and strikes, and I'm going to do that. If the president does something that works for us, I'm going to say it. If the president does something that doesn't work for us, I'm going to say that too. But I'm going to be respectful about how we do it. I mean, this governor spends every day wanting to talk about the president. It's probably because he doesn't want us talking about property taxes or corruption. So I mean that. And his brother's a good friend of mine, a big supporter of mine. I get it. But I want to be sure that New Yorkers have a governor who will absolutely serve them. And I'll work with anybody who wants to invest in New York, invest in infrastructure, lower taxes, make things better. But I also want to be sure that if there's a policy, by the way, the SALT deduction. Congress could have extended that SALT deduction for New York taxpayers. Yes, the reason it's a problem in New York is because New York taxes too much. That is true. But it still, however, didn't necessarily accommodate the fact that none of us want to be overtaxed. So there are certain things that I think you need to say. So it's not a matter of any of that. I'll work with anybody, including him, to accomplish whatever is necessary for the people of the state of New York. You got my commitment to that. As far as same-sex marriage, it is the law of the land, and it is now recognized as a constitutional right. I say to you, I raise my right hand and swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and therefore I will protect all of the laws as defined written in the Constitution or defined by the United States Supreme Court. That's my position. I said, ma'am, yes, and then I'll get over here to you, sir. Yes.
Hi, my name is Leslie, and we're from Dutchess County.
You came all the way over here?
All the way over.
Don't tell anyone.
With the recent and tragic murder of Molly Tibbetts, by an illegal immigrant
Yeah.
in the United States. I'd like your views on immigration, sanctuary states, and sanctuary cities.
Okay. I'm going to tell you that both political parties in Congress have not lived up to their responsibility to deal with a comprehensive immigration policy. No matter what we think, they have been playing a game of politics for however many generations. Whether it's border security or a path to naturalization, either way, the federal government needs a solution. And the more they put this off, the more pressure it puts on communities, on states, on counties and whatever, and creates a scenario where you can have those who are living here that are violent by nature or committing crimes that aren't being brought to justice. Number two, that means that it is my obligation, should I be governor of the state of New York, to enforce the law. To enforce the law. And that means everything. The Constitution provides certain rights to people, and they need to be protected, but so too must we ensure that whether it's MS-13 or somebody who's committing violent crime, they need to be held accountable. The governor went out and said just the other day, I'm not going to work with the federal government. Well, listen, you can take issue with the policymakers, that's okay. But the men and women who actually sacrificed to support and protect, by the way, Immigration and Customs Enforcement found a Nazi, and sent them home. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. So we need to ensure that there's a healthy balance. I do not support the establishment of sanctuary, anything, because I think at the end of the day, everybody deserves a government that protects them. And if you come forward and you want to be able to follow your way to citizenship, there's a way to do that. And beyond that, you shouldn't have to live in your home. And I say this, by the way, you shouldn't be fearful of your government, whether you're here legally or not. But if you're here illegally, you need to work through a system to become legal. That's the way it's supposed to be. So I don't embrace this concept of making New York a sanctuary state. I think you follow the rules, we follow the rules, we all have to live by the rules, but we do it in a very respectful and kind way. America is compassionate by nature. But that means leaders have to stop demagoguing the issue and start solving the problem. And they're not. Because they all want to play this game where they don't want to cooperate so that they can win an election. Focus on solving the problem. But I think that covers the breadth of my opinion. Yes, sir, you had your hand up the whole time.
Yeah, my name is Paul. I just wanted to follow up what the gentleman over here mentioned about the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
You mentioned upholding the Constitution, but then you said that teachers shouldn't be armed. So if a teacher wants to be armed, can they exercise their Second Amendment right? And on top of that, the other thing that goes on top of that is we don't have free speech licenses. We don't have free speech zones where you're not allowed to speak whatever you want. So why can we have gun-free zones where you can't, and that's still a constitutional right? It's number 2 for a reason. It's there to protect the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So why can we limit our gun ownership, and we don't limit our free speech anytime someone mentions that? We don't license it. We wouldn't license free speech, but we license handguns. We license all sorts of things. Where do we go from there, especially with the teachers? If they want to be armed, why can't they?
Well, I think that's a decision. I believe in, I have this philosophy of localization, and it actually fits for me for education entirely. So whether it's that scenario or how it is we produce the outcomes in our school districts, I think the employer does get to make that determination with their employees. So I would say to you that is a localized choice. If the school district wants to negotiate that as part of their policy, they get to do that because they have a right to do that with their employees through collective bargaining and otherwise. That's what I embrace. And that, for me, extends to beyond that, right? When it comes to education, now I know I'm taking, so that's your question. Let me go a little bit further and say, when it comes to education, I don't believe in this massive top-down approach. I do think that local school districts and communities with teachers and families need to be able to address the concerns, the needs of their particular district. Establish the curriculum, with a degree, establish curriculum, the delivery of service, make sure that we're educating kids for the jobs we have and the jobs we need in that particular region. I do think that there is that ability of an employer to negotiate that right with an employee. That is, by the way, also something we say, if you work at the local deli, you can't just shout out whatever you want. The employer gets to make those determinations or those decisions with their employee. There are certain limits to what you can do as an employee, whether it's freedom of speech or your Second Amendment rights, that there are. And that's a decision that gets to be made, in my opinion, between employer and employee. And in the case of school districts, you do that through collective bargaining.
Even if they're state employees in public schools?
They're all negotiated as part of a collective bargaining agreement. So if they want to negotiate that as part of their rights as employees, I choose to let them make that determination. And I would offer to you, you don't want the governor shoving his or her ideology down the throats of a local school district one way or another. Mario Cuomo had something to say about that. He said, be careful about shoving your ideology down the throats of somebody else, because someday they're going to do the same to you. And so I do think that that is a decision that gets made as part of a collective bargaining agreement between school district, employer, and employee. And those employees are local employees. They're not state employees. School district employees are localized. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Tony. My question is, 4 years ago, we sat in here with Mr. Astorino when he was running for governor.
Yeah.
And, you know, had a lot of the same ideas that you did.
Yeah.
What can you bring, what can you give New York in terms of your what can you,
Why do I think I can win?
as opposed to what Astorino said? Well, okay, I work for the state, so trust me, I'm a little
You must
fried.
always have long days. Listen, first I would be careful. I'm not here to tell you about punditry and politics. I really want to answer your questions, and you decide if I can win. I don't characterize or weigh myself against the candidate from 4 years ago, but I do know 4 years later the world has changed in New York. Many of the things that they talked about 4 years ago, the corruption, the continued spending, the high taxation, maybe a lot of folks just didn't believe it. Maybe they just didn't at the time think it was as bad as it is. But we've seen over the last 4 years something change, right? First, with all due respect to her, Cynthia Nixon is running basically with a different philosophy, but for the same reasons I am. That this government is corrupted. It's broken. We see it. It's incompetent. I mean, so I think after these last 4 years, many New Yorkers have said, whoa, wait a minute, maybe there's something there. 6, 7 close associates and employees of the governor found guilty of federal corruption charges. I mean, Chris is the only one I'm embarrassed to be terribly difficult in front of, but I will say, the governor says, I didn't know what Joe Procopo was doing. His lieutenant, the guy was in the office next to the governor for 80 days making phone calls trying to connect donors with government services. You didn't know what he was doing. He was in the office next to you. I can tell you, I would probably ask the guy who worked for me, what are you doing here? He didn't work there anymore. Elaine Calieros, the head of SUNY. Oh, I didn't know what he was doing. He was just selling access. George Pataki hired him. Yet, of course, that isn't true. These guys at Crystal Run, never heard of them. Never heard of it. I mean, honestly, maybe he's Mr. Magoo. I have no idea. But at the end of the day, 4 years later, you look around and you think, oh my gosh, it's as bad as they said it was. And it is. Here's the other thing. There's a reason that most governors in America and the president only serve for 8 years. Because at the end of 8 years, one, you can consume too much power, too much authority, too much of your resources. You can think that you're really important. And the minute, as an elected official, you think you're really important, that is the time you should stop being an elected official. And I think, quite frankly, we've seen it. We have seen it. 8 years is enough. And so to the extent I can tell you that I think voters are a little bit more upset than they were 4 years ago, that's true. The other is, I'm putting it all out there. And I don't know that one person did or didn't. I'm just telling you that I am. Because I really believe in this stuff. I mean, I actually believe, as Robert Kennedy said, here I am quoting a Democrat, that public service is a dignified duty. It is our responsibility to find new ways to give back. I believe in it. And I am embarrassed by my state government. I am embarrassed by a governor who thinks you say or do anything to get elected. We heard it 4 days ago. I'm embarrassed by that. So all I will tell you is that I think there are a lot of things coming together that make this winnable. But it depends on you. If you leave tonight and say, listen, I think he's a blowhole, and I'm not going to vote for him, then that's your choice. But if you leave tonight saying, you know what, what's so difficult? Maybe I'm going to give this guy a shot. That's how you win. By saying to people, you are the reasonable alternative to what you think that you've been getting for these last 8 years. And I believe there are New Yorkers in the city, on Long Island, and upstate who absolutely believe that if we are a reasonable alternative, somebody that they can trust well enough, they may not agree, but can trust well enough, we will win in November.
Yes, yes, yes.
You want to leave? No. Are you coming after me?
No, I'm just sitting there.
You scared the heck out of the security guard. She's going to hit me with that. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Joelle.
Joelle?
Nice to meet you. I'm also from Orange County.
Okay.
And my question is, I guess, maybe like the pay-to-play corruption. In Orange County, we have we know for a fact that Governor Cuomo accepts a lot of money from the block vote, which has become of a great concern to many people in Orange County. And I'm just wondering what your position is on terms of holding the block vote accountable, making sure that they don't circumvent laws that they continue to circumvent to get their way.
So first, I want to say this to you. I think that every voter should be treated equally. I don't necessarily assign anything to anybody. So number one, you are all equal in my view. Every voter has their right to cast their vote, to make their contribution, to say how they want their public, their society. And if you all want to act as a unit, that's your choice too. But I think we change the rules. See, that's the problem. I was with somebody the other day who said to me, well, there's corruption in Albany because they have this money and they have that money and they have this and they have that. And I said, no, there's corruption in Albany because somebody chose to be corrupt. Stop, and I'm not saying you are, but don't whitewash everybody in elected office and say, the problem is this, that. No, there are individuals who chose to break the rules. Change the rules. Change the rules. So the way that I would do it is this. And if you want, Chris mentioned, if you go to MolinaroForNY.com, I've got 23 pages of pay-to-play and corruption reform. So perhaps the most comprehensive package of reforms that any gubernatorial candidate has ever presented. And I say this very carefully. Consider me the Teddy Roosevelt of corruption. We're going to go to Albany and we're going to break down the doors and we're going to tear out this corruption from its roots because it's stealing. It's stealing from us, and it's why we lost faith in this government. Number one, universal code of ethics, period. Every layer of government, every division, every department needs to be held to the highest of standard. Number two, independent ethics commission. No more you respond to this organization that responds to the governor or serves at the pleasure of. Total independence. Number three, on day one, January 1st, the day I take office, we will impanel a true moral commission. We will say to these individuals have the authority of the Constitution of the state of New York to hold anybody who chooses to circumvent the rules in the state or in the government. We will hold them accountable, and we will let it go until it's done. I don't care if it's going after Republicans, Democrats, state legislators, department heads, or even the governor. At the end of the day, I want them scared. I want them worried. I want them to know they can't break the rules anymore. Number four, term limits. I will demand a vote on term limits because it'll clean things up quickly. It'll change blood, it'll hold people accountable, and that I think is critical. And then we'll take on campaign finance issues, which means close the LLC loophole. I don't know if you know this, but close the LLC loophole, lower the amount you can contribute to office holders in the state of New York. I mean, I don't want to make news, but you can cut it in half as far as I'm concerned. And then change what you can spend it on. This state has the most porous and least restrictive campaign finance rules in the country, and we need to change that. So by doing that, by starving the system of money, by holding people accountable, and by having a sheriff, a true moral commission to go after corruption in all of its forms, we will clean house. People will be afraid to break the rules, and office holders will not be given the ability to circumvent. We'll also, by the way, as I said, end the checks to individual private interests. And if you do business with the state of New York, you can't contribute to office holders. And I want that to affect every layer of government, from village board right on up. Just end it. Cut it out. Because by doing that, we'll give the power and the resource and the benefit back to the people of the state of New York. And I'm going to demand a vote. If they don't want to vote on it, I will stuff it into my budget. I have a budget that I present in the beginning of the year, and I will hold up state government until they vote yes or no. That's how important I think it is. Okay?
Governor. Time for one more question.
We're going to do one more question. Maybe we'll do two if I can squeeze one in. So we're going to go. I'm going to be careful. I'm going to go right here first.
Stacy, my husband couldn't be here tonight, so he sent me with a question that I'm going to ask you on his behalf.
Wait a minute. This is now 3 questions?
No, 2. One inspired, one not so serious. He wants to know your view on fracking, and is there anything you can do about the New York mess?
Is there anything we can do about the New York mess? I want you to know.
If you haven't taken up that habit yet, I don't recommend you start.
Okay. So this is what I think on fracking. I live in a county with several Superfund sites. I know the environmental impact. I also know, however, that we have, with one click of a pen, made it a devastating decision on the southern tier of New York, which, by the way, looks out into Pennsylvania. I mean, like right over the line, and watches them frack. Here's my position. identify water sources. We have to do that. We have a very poor job of doing this. New York needs to identify water sources, map out aquifers, and create the protections to protect them, period. And that, by the way, isn't just about fracking. That's everywhere. We've seen it with PFOA. We've seen it in other places. We do not do a good job identifying water sources and protecting them. Do that first. And then I have said that I would not oppose a highly monitored DEC pilot in a selected area, just to show whether or not we can manage this. And then use the environmental law that by the way, his father imposed, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, to govern so that we can mitigate impacts. If you can't mitigate an impact, you don't get to do business. That's the way it works everywhere else in the state of New York. So those are the things that I would want to have happen in order to facilitate. That's my position. So I'm going to take one last question from this, but then I'm going to answer the Mets question because I got a really good story I want to tell.
Joan from
I know.
Red Oak,
Yes.
just a general question. What do you think is the top item that our current governor is going to target for?
Oh, the top item? That's funny. I mean, there's going to be a litany of things. He's already said it, and I think it's comical. I'm mini Trump. I mean, I've certainly seen that with all of you. I think he's criticizing my height. No, listen, I know the way this works. He's got a lot of money. He's going to tell you I don't like women. He's going to tell you I don't like babies. I don't like thises. I don't like that's. Listen, what I tell people all the time is, first of all, politicians are the truest during a campaign. If you're willing to say or do anything, then you're willing to say or do anything. And I think you're going to see that. You're going to see $30, $40 million of money being spent telling you that I'm just an awful person. It's going to be hard to combat that. It is. But I have faith. I have faith that I was planted on this earth for a reason and that voters will see through the nonsense because I think we've had enough of it. I think that no matter what, the toxicity, the venom, the anger, I think we've had enough of it. And I'm just going to keep plugging along, telling people that I've done this job for this reason, and New Yorkers deserve a governor that respects them, not one that will take advantage of his office to keep power. So there'll be lots of things he says, and as I joked earlier, nearly all of them will be untrue. So let me tell you about the Mets, and I want to say this, just because it's funny and it's true. So and it's a good way for me to close. I promise that I'll follow up with all of you when we're done. If you've got other questions, if